So some of us know that groundwater banking, or actually groundwater balancing, is an important issue, especially with Sigma in place. And that is more about long-term protecting the farm for multiple generations, but also it changes a whole other dynamics. And this is something that's we're starting to see in Wall Street with Larry Fint and his fund, as well as State Street and a number of other big investors who are starting to push their investments, such as like Kellogg's or Del Monte, Levi's, McDonald's. They're interested in the supply chain. So it's the products that we're producing for agriculture, the cotton, the almonds, items like that, those actually are the raw products that go into the cereals, into the jeans, items like that. That supply chain is in threat with water scarcity. And the whole item with the water scarcity is that it's happening worldwide. The nice thing about California is that we've started to move towards a direction that's going to create sustainability, long-term sustainability that creates a need for more and more companies to invest in California for those farm products. And so we may see a reduction in our agricultural land as Sigma first takes place because of the need to reduce the number of productive acres to get to groundwater balancing. But then we can start seeing an increase in that particular land. There's a quote from a gentleman, if anybody's seen that movie, The Big Short, where Dr. Michael Burry was shorted the housing crisis. At the end, he talks about the importance of water and the importance that water is going to be his next big bet. And he finds that any agricultural land that has the availability of water and be able to sustain the agricultural production is going to become very, very valuable in the future as we start to go through different water stress issues. But that's kind of where we're seeing the market push from Wall Street, that the same banks that manage your mortgages and manages the overall infrastructure, they're really pushing the Kellogg's and everybody else to start to think about, hey, we want farms that are going to produce consistently. And so that's what this presentation is about. How do we get to groundwater balancing at the farm level and start to create a brand? Because the way that we see it is that eventually there's going to be a brand that you can say that this production, this almond production or this grape production is Sigma compliant, sustainable, long-term groundwater. And that branding is what's going to push California's farming out in front of places like Texas or Arizona. Even places like Thailand and India are having these major drought issues. So as we start to see this progress, now you start to think about, okay, as a farmer, I'm going to start to brand that I'm groundwater compliant. I'm actually can sustain for the next 20 years to 2 generations to 3 generations and continue on from that, just because of the way that California has put the laws in place. So the California high crops are going to allow for a lot of that aspects. Now let's think about the valley itself. The valley is like a giant bathtub. We just have to rethink the way that we manage that bathtub and recharge it and get more and more water into it. And it's all about, how much water can we get into it, or how much water we take out, and how much water do we put back in. And we can get that to a certain balance. The first step is reduce the amount of water that we're consuming. So an average orchard is going to use about 4 acre feet. If we can bring that down to 2 acre feet, then you only have to replace 2 acre feet. So the key is, how do we start to do more and more conservation? And so when we recharge, the other aspect is, where is the water coming from typically? The water is typically coming from our Sierras, but the climate change is changing so dramatically that our rain events are going to be bigger, they're going to be more intense, and it's being able to have that infrastructure to grab that water when it's available. More rain in the mountains as compared to snow is going to start to melt the flow a little bit more, and dams are going to start to discharge, and they're already starting to discharge at different times of the year. Typically, we were always used to having the dams hold the water for flood mitigation and then discharge it gradually throughout the year. Now they're starting to discharge a little bit early in the fall because they're scared of the intensity of the rain, and they're starting to to discharge a little bit faster in the spring because it's the fast snow melting. So as we start to see these different changes and the discharge of dam releases, it's important to have the infrastructure on your farm to be able to capture that water, that conveyance water, and then be able to recharge the groundwater. So it's just rethinking our overall infrastructure and rethinking it on the farm level. The next step is really when you have your particular location, think about how you can actually terrace it or capture high intensity rains. Because one of the areas that we're going to start seeing is as climate change increases, there's a high percentage of atmospheric water. That atmospheric water and those atmospheric rivers are some of the things that we're starting to measure. And actually in California, you can actually have a readout when an incoming storm's coming. What's going to be the intensity? How much water is it going to dump? Because we're starting to see that instead of a traditional rain event that maybe be 3 inches or 4 inches, you're having times when you're getting 11 inches, 12 inches of dump at one time. Being able to capture that high intensity and be able to store it. And if you have a terracing or you have some type of retention areas, it's more about keeping that water on the premise instead of trying to get it out to the flood canals and every place else. Now, the most common way that we're talking about retention of water or recharging is what's called flood mark or above ground flooding. This is started. We've had a number of different studies, and it's proven as a great avenue, but it's typically only done in the winter months when the trees are dormant. You try to do it in the springtime, anytime like that, or when it's flowering, you're going to start to kill out plants. So, but it's a great way to start to think about when you have conveyance water, you have the availability to do it, this should be your first avenue. The second avenue is the cutting of the water. We talked about that. We talked about how do I cut from 4 acre feet down to 2 acre feet. One of the great ways that we're starting to see out in the overall marketplace is subsurface irrigation. And subsurface irrigation is something that's below the ground, away from evaporation, so you're cutting that whole evaporation loss. And it's typically anywhere from 30% to 50% water reduction. Deep root is the first one. It's pressurized, creates this moisture plume. Drip, we've all seen the drip. And the third one is a virtual water table. We're starting to see, and especially down in Kern and south areas, is a lot of reverse drain tiles. Reverse drain tiles are your traditional drain tiles that you typically will see along a river, a farm that's near a river, or north past Sacramento where there's a lot of rain, and they need to pull that water out. They pull the water out, and so that the water table drops down so the plants can grow. But in a reverse drain tile, they're still putting the drain tiles in, but they're pumping the water in. So whenever there's an extra available water, they're starting to recharge the groundwater, trying to get as much water into that subsurface. And these are buried typically between 6 feet to 10 feet. It's very common practice in the Midwest. You see that tractor that right there, it's called a soil max. It actually rips the soil, puts in the drain tile, and covers it up all at one time. Just it's one process. That is what we're starting to see, though, is that in some areas they're putting too much pressure, and when you have too much pressure and you don't have enough percolation below that drain tile, it'll actually start to create an aquifer that are artesian well above the surface. So we're starting to see some bubbling up in the area. So it's kind of a balance that needs to start taking place. And the north in Sacramento, they are starting to think about how not only are they going to drain the water from the fields in the wintertime, but use the same drain tiles to recharge the groundwater. So that way they're getting actually at a groundwater balancing both times of the year. And when they drain it in the wintertime, storing it in a reservoir, and then using that reservoir water to recharge it. So now they're not taking any water from the groundwater or pumping water, and they can get into a balanced atmosphere. A newer product is what's called a smart drain tile. The smart drain tile is used for both directions. It's just like the one I just talked about earlier. It's used for pushing water into it subsurfacely and creates a moisture plume. And that moisture plume is where the trees feed from, eliminating any water loss to evaporation. At the same time, in the wintertime, you use the same product to overcharge the groundwater or overcharge the pipe, so you're adding water to the groundwater, so that you're getting into a balance. And this type of system, this is where we're starting to see the projections are, you're gonna go from a 4 acre feet on an orchard down to 2 acre feet for the irrigation period. And then in the wintertime, you're able to recharge 2 acre feet. So now you're getting at that balance and being able to monitor in the volumes of water that are coming in. That way, when you go to your GSP or you go into your trade association, you're showing how much water you're consuming, you can show that you're at total balance. And then be able to brand that. My farm is a water balanced farm within this GSA. I meet Sigma, it's sustainable, and take that to whoever you're supplying your end goods to as a branding option. So, and I think what's going to happen over the next 5 years is that additional branding is going to allow you to have a higher price point for your products, because there's going to be more and more need to be sustainable farming, sustainable products moving forward. So it's all becomes part of that branding that California's good at. We're good at branding our products and our services. So the conclusion is water banking. We talked about water balancing, but in some years you're going to want to overcharge, put more water into the groundwater than you actually use. That way you have water available for the drought years, the years that there's not going to be any convenience to recharge in the wintertime. That's going to be a real key. And thinking about a 5-year horizon, that way you can always have it. The second item is the secure supply chain. Being able to show that you can produce cotton, you can produce almonds, you can produce your product for your supply chain, for those end users, for those raw materials to a Levi's or something like that. And then the Sigma branding. I think that's going to be a really big thing to start to focus around. So that's it. That's the presentation. Got any questions?
Is subsurface drip used in citrus at all?
It's been tried in citrus. The problem with sometimes subsurface drip is that the root system will kink up the units, or if you have gopher problems, it'll eat the gophers. The gophers will eat into it. So those are the challenges, because it doesn't go far enough down. I think that subsurface drip, if it was put at least 2 feet down, you'd probably be out of some of those ranges, because the root system is usually at 2 feet. The last product I showed you, the aquifer pipe, that's actually put 5 feet down. So it's put very far away from the root systems, and it creates the plants feed from the moisture plume, not from the pipe itself.
Who manufactures the smart drain tile?
So who manufactures this smart drain tile? It's a company called Groundwater Products, the company I'm from. And so that's a new product that we've launched. It's actually, we launched it 4 years ago in the urban areas, and we use it for irrigating landscape with gray water. We take water from your laundry and your showers and use it to keep lawns. But we just happened to have a farmer who was a client, and he says, hey, I could use this in my orchards. And so we launched it into the orchards this year.
The gray water is good for...
So is the gray water good for orchards? So we don't use gray water for orchards. That was just something we did with the landscape, not so much the orchards. But what we are looking at is that we're talking to a couple of companies that build hotels and motels, and the gray water that's coming off of the hotels, being able to irrigate the local farms or orchards in those areas, and using other types of wastewater. Because one of the things with wastewater is, how do you treat it enough that humans can come into contact with it, or it's delivered subsurfacely away from human contact. So with that particular product, we can actually deliver it without human contact. So imagine that local Hilton going up to 300 rooms, that would be able to support a 50 acre to 100 acre orchard consistently.
Has been done any emphasis as far as filtering the water?
What's the question?
Any emphasis on filtering that water?
No, the only filterization that typically happens in a gray water application is we take out the large particles. We take out the hair and the lint, but as far as the soaps and everything else, they flow naturally into the ground. We find that the ground enzymes will break it up, and the skin that's coming off of a shower from your body is actually adds to the nitrogen, so it actually helps the overall subsurface ecosystem. Yeah, good question.
Interesting.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for attending and listening, and appreciate it. Thank you.